pharmaceutical companies are filing for patents to try and do postbiotics and things like that. Yeah. In fact, Scheering Labs and Nestle have both stuck a flag in the ground trying to claim fecal microbial transplant as a drug.
Really? Like poop pills?
It's exactly poop pills.
Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But if you're ready to level up your life and get results that truly matter in your health, business, mindset, and relationships, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to Scheer Madness, where we have unscripted, real conversations with the world's top athletes, entrepreneurs, and coaches. Discover real-world and tactical advice from the best in the business. Let's go. Welcome back to another episode of Scheer Madness. We are doing a threesome podcast today, but our second guest is not with us. I'm going to be walking in any minute here. But I have a return guest coming on the show here today, Dr. Kenneth Brown. He is a world-renowned gastroenterologist, and he actually helped me a lot with my gut issues when I was struggling, helped me go through some different SIBO protocols, actually found out that my entire, I think it was large intestine, small intestine was like falling throughout my gastrointestinal tract. So all this being said, he really helped me in the beginning journey of healing my gut. And he really bridges the gap between Western medicine and functional medicine by taking more of a holistic approach, but of course, looking at the gut because the gut plays the biggest role in our overall health. He's also the co-host of the Gut Check Project, which I just had the honor of going on that show. So if you are watching
I'm just going to interrupt here, was the best episode we've ever done. Thank you so much. Yes, fantastic episode. Yeah, loved it. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, so those who are watching on YouTube, if you notice the backdrop, it's the Gut Check Project here. And he's just an awesome human, and I'm incredibly grateful to have him on the show. Dr. Brown, thanks for coming on.
No, Rachel, thank you so much. And my return on the Scheer Madness podcast, it's been a little bit, been a few years. It's my honor. I kind of miss our little buddy that we had last time, your little puppy at the time.
We had little Lily on the podcast last time, and she was probably, I think, like 7 months old. She sat on my lap. She slept the whole time. It was awesome. And I think that was also too when I was just starting my podcast. So that was maybe like the 4th or 5th episode that I've done. But it was actually one of the best episodes, to be completely transparent, that we've done talking about gut health, with going so much into SIBO and how the gut and the brain are interconnected. So I'm really excited to dive more into gut health here today. And I want to talk about why the food we eat plays such a big role in our gut and therefore our mental health, but also why the gut is so essential for longevity, because I know that's a hot topic right now. So let's start first with the nutrition side.
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit of my background. So as Rachel said, I'm a gastroenterologist. My initial research was in the pharmaceutical industry, where we were looking at these different ways to treat various diseases. And that's how I ended up getting more into the functional side and looking at supplements. Since then, so that was about 6 years ago when we launched our product. Since then, we've been dealing with a lot of different scientists around the world. And this movement of how important the microbiome is, a lot of people are finally starting to get there. In fact, to the point where the microbiome basically should be treated like a separate organ. You have your heart, your brain, your microbiome. The microbiome, everybody probably has heard the term a bunch of times. It's the 100 trillion microbiota described as the bacteria and the genes that they have. Those genes interact with your body, specifically your brain and your immune system. And we are now seeing that one of the most important anti-aging things that you can do is keep your microbiome young. So if your microbiome gets old, you get old.
What does that mean? Keep your microbiome young.
Exactly. So if you can keep your microbiome young, meaning if you keep microbial diversity, if you keep the good bacteria greater than the bad bacteria, known as reversing dysbiosis and all these other terms. So the simplistic thing is keeping it young will keep you young. If you don't treat your microbiome well and it actually has significant dysbiosis, think of it more like a parasite inside of you as opposed to something that can help you. So this is the really exciting thing. We see these anti-aging experts, Peter Attia, Rhonda Patrick, David Sinclair, these people that are out there, writing books and discussing great things, and they talk about these cellular mechanisms, the mTOR, the AMPK pathway. They looking at sirtuins and different things like that. But the reality is, very few of them are talking about the microbiome as something that you can manipulate. You have your genes. And we know that the microbiome has about 150-fold more genes than you have. So it has an influence that you can actually manipulate a little bit, as opposed to the fact that, well, I'm this height, I can't change it, this is what my genes are. So that's the really exciting thing, and it's just in the early cusp of it. So when you say, how do you keep your microbiome young? Well, that's kind of the whole talk then. That becomes the whole conversation going forward. So getting people to understand how important it is the key. And the only way to really do that is to lead a certain lifestyle, which keeps you young, and we can get into each one of those aspects, but also to feed your microbiome what it wants. And that's where the nutrition aspect comes in, and that's the control that you have.
Jump on in.
You can jump in?
We got Eric.
We have a special guest, everybody. We are now, so she did introduce this as the Scheer Madness Threesome Podcast.
It is the Scheer Madness Now Threesome Podcast.
And Eric is a model.
Obviously.
Astronaut here, jumping in.
Not anymore, not in the Van Allen's belt anymore, but I made it back.
Yeah, but he's actually the co-host to the Gut Check project as well. What's a little bit of your background?
I'm an anesthesia provider. That's how I met Ken. But I was an astronaut. I just didn't get to launch for discrepancies that we don't need to address here publicly. And other than that, Atrantil gut health is a passion of mine, and that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, we were just talking about how keeping the gut microbiome young is essentially the key to staying young overall, avoiding things like dysbiosis, I'm assuming leaky gut, intestinal permeability, just anything that causes the microbiome diversity to be low really affects everything.
Well, everything. And so let's just look at some of the research that's out there right now. You and I know it's going to seem weird when I say this, but are 99% identical genetically. But our microbiomes could be 90% different, which could explain why when you have family members, one person develops cancer, one person may have cardiometabolic disease, one person has one thing, the other one doesn't, they lead similar lifestyles. So it has been shown that if your microbiome is in tune and you have a healthy microbiome, meaning broad microbial diversity. So what we know is as we age, the microbiome shrinks in its diversity, meaning you have more, you go from this bell-shaped curve to more of a peak, right, in one area. Frequently or almost exclusively in all animal studies and human studies, you end up having decreased diversity and you have a shift from good bacteria to more bad bacteria. The one place where that is different is our supercentenarians. So when they looked at the microbiome of people that make it past 100, they actually have a microbiome similar to a teenager. So then the question is, did they become 105 because of their microbiome, or are they 105 and their microbiome is that good? It's the chicken and the egg kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But looking at it very clearly, if you can protect your microbiome and keep the ratio of good bacteria to bad bacteria better and keep microbial diversity, meaning you have lots of different kinds, then you produce anti-inflammatory metabolites. And that gets back to what we have talked about and you have talked about on your social media, that inflammation equals aging, otherwise known as inflammaging. And so that's where I think it's really exciting that we're starting to have these scientists start looking at how do we manipulate the microbiome to live a longer, healthier life, otherwise known as health span.
I think that's interesting that you talk about the centurions, right?
Mm-hmm.
like they having a healthy microbiome, almost like a teenager, and how there's that connection with a robust, diverse microbiome and optimal health, essentially. But it almost kind of makes sense that, you know, like the lifestyle component too, because you can imagine that these centenarians, people who are living past 100, they've had to live, you know, a relatively healthy lifestyle with their diet, with nutrition, with what they're putting in their body, stress levels, all of that to allow them to live to 100. So that really makes me think, you know, is it because of the lifestyle that led to a healthy microbiome that led to them living longer? Or was it just like, okay, as we get older, the microbiome ends up getting lower in diversity, and that's what leads to the longevity being shortened?
Yeah,
Does that
absolutely.
make sense?
100%. When I've talked about different aspects of the microbiome and longevity, and that's why you said, how do you keep your microbiome young? Because this is the great part, all the things that we discuss. So if you look at the blue zones, where they have looked at how people tend to live longer, there are certain things about this. One of the things is socialization. Mm-hmm. Probably one of the key components that we don't focus on. They are
like
social.
Social, like relationships.
They are
people.
social. They interact with people. They are with each other. They
Networks.
are networks.
Yeah, family units. Very strong. Yeah.
All these different blue zones, there are daily habits, which involves movement, which involves ritual.
Yeah.
If you look at Okinawa, Japan, it's tea. If you look at Sardinia, if you do this, they have coffee, they get together. And as they do this, they share. So every time that we sit there and meet, we actually slowly share our microbiome together, because in proximity with other humans, you actually do share some of your microbiome with each other. Socialization is one of the most under-recognized aspects. And, you know, we've joked about this, that there's the studies of fecal microbial transplant, you know, with the fat mouse to the skinny mouse, and then the skinny mouse becomes fat and vice versa.
Which is real, by the way.
Which is 100% real, yeah. So when we look at this, when we look at microbiome manipulation, there is something called fecal microbial transplant that is really fascinating for the general media. They love to bring this up. They always talk about, you know, fecal transplants. And we know that when you do this, you can have consequences. You can take somebody. So I personally have had twins. One person had ulcerative colitis, and the parents chose to do a microbial transplant into the ulcerative colitis twin. It actually cured her ulcerative colitis. But she actually developed some of the other issues that the other twin had, which was some polycystic ovary, obesity, things like that the other one didn't have. And so clearly these genes are being transmitted also. And that brings up that whole thing of, I joke that if you're going to go on a dating app, you should at least inquire about somebody's microbiome and their, you know, can I please see your microbial diversity panel before we go on the first date?
Microbiome test. Look at all of your microbial diversity. Yeah. And I'd say most people have a very low diverse microbiome, and especially after testing everybody at Rachel Scheer Nutrition, more people are very low in diversity, or if not moderately low in diversity. So I'd love to talk about like some tactical ways to work on diversity, increasing that. You mentioned socialization, but like the nutrition, the food that we're eating too, and how the foods that we eat actually create those short chain fatty acids or those postbiotics, and how that actually is the key to longevity. Yeah.
So what we know is that the microbiome itself, one of the things that people don't realize is that your microbiome breaks down the products that you eat, specifically polyphenols and fibers. Those things are not well absorbed, and when they get to your colon, where the majority of your microbiome should be, if it isn't, then that's where we have dysbiosis, meaning that you've got, you know, bacteria growing where it shouldn't be. But when you eat something like vegetables, which are high in polyphenols, or you have a supplement which is poorly absorbed, like many supplements that people don't realize, quercetin and turmeric and green tea extract, all of the above, they're poorly absorbed. They get to the colon, resveratrol, and I can go on and on and on. And if you have the right microbial diversity or the right microbiomes to be able to break them down, then they cleave these large molecules and other bacteria break them down, and then smaller compounds are kicked off. And a lot of those are the key anti-inflammatory compounds, anti-cancer compounds, and anti-aging compounds that go through your body and work as antioxidants, and they also kill aging cells. One of the reasons why we age is because there's methylation of the DNA, and then there's like, basically you've got a cell that is growing badly. These molecules go, oh, you're kind of old and non-functioning. Why don't you just go away? And that's autophagy and mitophagy, getting rid of the mitochondria, getting rid of the cell. And these are the type of products. Super fascinating, because we've worked with several researchers where through a digestive process, Dr. Sylvia Molino was able to show that when you take polyphenols like quebracho and chestnut specifically, because those are the molecules that we work with, she showed that when you go through a digestive process and then ferment it, putting it with human microbiome, and then put it through what's called a gas chromatograph, it was fascinating to see the hundreds of compounds that came out. For instance, the quebracho and the chestnut actually kick off quercetin. They kick off fumaric acid. They kick off green tea. These are all things that people go to a store and they buy, when actually large, stable polyphenols, if you have the right microbiome, can produce them for you. Urolithin A, urolithin B, which cause autophagy, mitophagy. And then all these other postbiotics, which include the short-chain fatty acids. And then these short-chain fatty acids, like butyrate, I always kind of talk about the short-chain fatty acids. I mean, the example I give, it's because I'm old, is like Maroon 5, where everybody thinks of Adam Levine, that's butyrate. But there's a bunch of other people in the band, and things like 3-propionic acid cross the blood-brain barrier and decrease neuroinflammation. And so it's almost like you cannot reproduce this in a lab. And Eric and I talk about this all the time, because guess what's happening right now? Pharmaceutical companies are filing for patents to try and do postbiotics and things like that. Yeah. In fact, Shearing Labs and Nestle have both stuck a flag in the ground trying to claim fecal microbial transplant as a drug.
Really? Like poop pills?
Well,
like, wait.
I think the process
it's exactly poop pills.
Yeah.
But they're claiming their proprietary blend of poop pill is superior, but it doesn't matter, because what they're doing is they stuck a claim with the FDA trying to block anybody else from doing this. Don't even want to get in. This pissed me off. I'm sorry. I just saw that there was a file by David Sinclair's company where they're trying to make NMN. So have you ever heard of nicotinamide riboside?
Yeah.
So then David Sinclair figured out that if you go one step closer, which is NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide riboside, anyways, one of those things, he was showing in yeast that was more effective than nicotinamide riboside. Just saw that they filed with the FDA that it should be considered a drug, much like they did with NAC.
NAC, yeah.
Yeah, exactly like they did with that.
Which is just an amino acid.
And this is just a smaller version of the nicotinamide riboside. Whole separate discussion, but it just gets into the fact that Big Pharma is just trying to figure out a way to get into this.
Yeah.
They want to control the microbiome.
But I think this is really cool just from this perspective, in that, Rachel, I think this plays in really near and dear to the way that I know that you coach your clients, which is how do they make the correct decisions and then how do they select the right kinds of foods before they even get to supplementation or the ancillary choices. And that's important because the body, more often than not, really wants the supplements, but the elements, the nutrition from whole foods, long before you get them from some broken down, spun down pharmaceutical, made available, not really a natural way for it to be delivered modality for the body to use it the right way. So really you need to find the right kinds of foods that, just like what you talk about, how to support your health, how to make wise decisions on when you eat and what you eat and what kind of whole foods give those supply, because that's going to do far more for your colon to get the diversity and nurture that diversity rather than trying to find the little quick fix that's going to plug those little bitty holes.
Yeah, and I know I've heard you say before, like if probiotics worked and fixed all of the gut issues, then you'd be out of a job And I think that's like really why addressing the nutrition and the full picture is so essential, because like supplements help. And I love Atrantil, your guys' product that has, a lot of the polyphenol blends in there, because there is a lot of studies about polyphenols and how those are incredibly beneficial for supporting the microbiome. And I think when we combine, supplements, polyphenols, quercetin, resveratrol, I forget the weird one that's in your guys' supplement, what's it called?
The quebracho.
The quebracho. That's the one I can never remember. Plus, having a diet that's full of a lot of insoluble fiber, resistant starches, high quality animal protein, good healthy fats, monopolyunsaturated fats, that's essentially going to be the best thing you can do for your microbiome. But just pop in a probiotic and being like, this is fixing my gut issues, or for some people making it worse, is really not the answer.
95% of your body's serotonin is produced by the bacteria that resides in your gut. And this explains why when my gut was a wreck, or when clients come to work with me at Rachel Scheer Nutrition, they don't just suffer from things like bloating, constipation, diarrhea, but they also have symptoms of anxiety, depression, and brain fog, because our gut and our brain are highly interconnected. And as Hippocrates says, all disease begins and ends in the gut. And this is the exact reason why I am so passionate about taking a functional, root cause-based approach for any chronic health condition: gut issues, mental health illness, autoimmune conditions, stubborn weight loss, you name it. Me and my team do a comprehensive analysis looking at all these different systems so we can test instead of just guess, and then develop a customized nutrition plan and protocol to address these root causes and imbalances in the body and restore function. If you want to book a free 30-minute call with anyone from my team, click the link in the show notes or visit rachelscheer.com.
Yeah, and I'm not, not real black and white with the probiotics, but what we do know is in my literature, and I know that a lot of people have probiotics and they make a lot of money doing it. But in my literature, when we look at the 6-month data, it appears that probiotics consistently are equivalent to placebo when coming to gut health and other things like that, which says, okay, well, why is that? And when they looked at different studies, animal studies and such, about does the probiotic make it all the way to where it should be, which is the colon? And we've talked about different stuff on our podcast. For instance, there was a group of scientists that what they did is they took and they wanted to see the difference between a traditional probiotic, a lactobacillus, and a spore-based biotic in combination with a polyphenol. And then they wanted to see what would happen afterwards. And so the first thing they did is that they did coffee polyphenols, and they brewed it. They put it through a digestive tract, a synthetic digestive tract, and they then put it through a fermentation process, which would be the microbiome. And they looked at all the polyphenolic compounds, the antioxidant potential in all of that. And then they said, okay, well, now let's see what happens when you do a probiotic. And so then they brewed the probiotic, and through the brewing process, they found out that 0% of the probiotic survived. Yeah. So they said, okay, well, now that makes sense. Maybe it was too hot. So then let's just take room temperature coffee with this probiotic, and they put it in the stomach, and then they checked to see how much of the probiotic survived. 0% of the probiotic survived. They said, okay, well, let's do it just in the small bowel. 0% survived. So when you look at something like that, you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. In these models, we're seeing that it's probably not even making to where it should be. Then they took a spore-based biotic, and the spore-based biotic, they found out like 99% survived the boiling process, and then it remained 99% till it got to the colon, at which point it opened up. It comes out of its spore-based, and much to their surprise, they found out that the phenolic compounds exponentially increased, and the antioxidant potential exponentially increased. So what that means is that when you have the ability for organisms to break these polyphenolic compounds down, then you can actually increase that tremendously, which is why we started getting into the whole spore-based biotic, combining it with Atrantil. And that's how we have Atrantil Pro now. But we were working with the scientists at Microbiome Labs, Kieran Krishnan and those other PhDs over there, that they figured out that there are certain spore-based biotics that live in the soil. Polyphenols are in plants, and then the combination of the two allow this to happen. And so that got us thinking about why certain people, when they take Atrantil, maybe they get real bloated from it. But when they take Atrantil Pro, they don't. Then take a step back, that gets back to the diet that you've probably seen a bunch of times. When somebody has traditionally eaten very poorly, and then January 1st, they decide to make a resolution, and then they come to you and you're like, I'm eating great. I'm doing Mediterranean diet or plant-based, and I feel like crap.
I see that a lot,
Yeah.
actually. I see people who've been eating white bread and the pastas and, more of those processed type foods, and they've, don't get me wrong, they don't feel good, but then all of a sudden they start eating, a diet full of lots of veggies and broccoli and asparagus and all of this. They're like, I am so bloated. I feel way worse.
Yeah.
Even before. So let's break it down. What is happening there?
Go ahead.
Oh, I think that's fascinating, because if you don't have the right kind of biodiversity in the colon, more than likely you just simply don't have the right enzymes to break down these new foods, these new healthy foods that you're now introducing to your colon. So specifically, polyphenols are tannins. Many times people who are taking in more polyphenols, and of course, polyphenols are not just found in Atrantil, but they're also found in the colorful things that make
Green
up fruits
tea.
Fruits and vegetables. So when you're trying to migrate to this healthy lifestyle, by the time those compounds make their way to the colon, and if they're not being adequately broken down, it's going to result in bloating or a lack of appropriate digestion, and you're not kicking off the butyrates and the other postbiotics that you're seeking. So the next approach is, how do I, number one, repopulate my colon with the right kind of bacteria that's going to have something that breaks down polyphenols, most notably tannase, which polyphenols are tannins, so tannase is an enzyme that breaks down tannins.
Let's clarify that one thing here.
Sure.
So the polyphenols are a huge class of molecules.
Yeah, correct.
And they start out as small phenolic compounds, and as they get bigger, they become something called proanthocyanidins, which is what most of the researchers study.
Correct.
And when you combine multiple proanthocyanidins together, it becomes a tannin. So in other words, a tannin is Mother Nature's most stable and most complex polyphenol that hides all the other ones. So when I said that she did a gas chromatograph in the one study that Dr. Molina did, all these other smaller phenolic compounds that you're familiar with, quercetin and the green tea extract and all that. So yeah, all of those, they're hidden in here because they're so it's just so I'm just saying that the tannins are the largest, and when you eat a broad diet, you're going to take in tannins, and your body may not be able to break that down. And
thinking about the importance of tannins, it's actually it's a protective mechanism. It's protecting those polyphenols getting down to the colon for the same reason that, like, what is the gigantic tree, the sequoia tree that grows? It's the biggest tree in North America, I guess in the world, but
in California where they have
they had the Sequoia National Forest. Did you know that's a conifer, meaning that they have cones, and the only way that those cones will open is because of a forest fire. It's the only way that a new tree can be born. But the reason why that's okay is the tannins on that tree protect it from burning. So it's okay for the forest fire to occur, and it won't take out the main tree. It's the same principle by the time it gets to our bodies. Those tannins are protecting those polyphenols to get down to the colon where they can be safely disassembled and then used. So it's an applicable protection mechanism.
So it's safe to say the polyphenols that we intake through diet as well as supplementation are going to be way more effective than taking any kind of a probiotic supplement, essentially.
Yes. Well, but it have to be the right probiotic that, number one, could make the journey and then be armed with the right kind of enzymes to do that kind of breakdown.
Yeah. And that's where we talk a little bit about like the spore-based probiotics.
Correct.
Essentially
so that's where that is. And so in some of the research that's been actually been done, fascinating to me, there was a study that was actually published where they were looking at, okay, well, we have this this ability for these polyphenols to create these postbiotics. Let's look at the butyrate level. Let's look at different things, but let's not compare it to a probiotic. Let's compare it to the gold standard, inulin. Inulin is a thing that most people consider as the prebiotic that feeds bacteria. Shockingly, the studies showed in gas chromatograph that the amount of butyrate being produced, just one of the postbiotics, was exponentially higher than inulin, which kind of shows, and we've looked at several different articles on the show where the body really makes the postbiotics from these polyphenols. The fibers are also there to do different things. They work in conjunction. Fibers help you go to the bathroom. Fibers draw water in and these different things. But the bacteria really, if you have the right microbiome, I keep getting back to the same thing. If you have the right microbiome, you can take advantage of this. So I see the same thing that you see in my practice. People will go on these massively restrictive diets, and as they try and expand it, they find out that they feel really bloated. And I look at them and I say, okay, well, we need to keep expanding it, because in the long run, you need your microbiome to be young, to have the diversity. You being on this really restricted diet, whether it's FODMAP or elemental or whatever, you can only do that so long. At some point, you got to start breaking through and you got to start growing your microbiome.
And we do some of those protocols within practice. FODMAP, we've actually done elemental with great success. And I think that's where just the main distinction that people need to understand is that's a very short-term diet.
Exactly.
It's a healing protocol. FODMAP was actually something that wasn't meant for people to do long-term, but then I have people who go to gastroenterologists and they're like, just get on low FODMAP. And they just stay on it for the rest of their life. And it's such a disservice.
Dude, I don't understand how gastroenterology, it's so hard to get my colleagues to jump on board, but for some reason saying FODMAP, I've actually asked them, I was just like, you have a FODMAP handout. What does FODMAP stand for? Like, I don't know, man, just FODMAP. Just put them on FODMAP. I like saying it, FODMAP. And you're like, damn it.
Yeah.
But William Che out of University of Michigan showed if you're on that for more than 3 months, you're going to have micronutrient deficiency.
You will.
Yeah. And then you're going to decrease the diversity in your gut in the long run. And then these people try to add the foods back in and they're like, oh, I'm still not tolerating the foods. Well, what actually happened here is, one, we probably decreased the diversity in our gut even further. And yes, we did remove a lot of the fermentable carbohydrates for a short period of time that were feeding the bacteria. No gas was being produced, or maybe just minimal amounts. And so we felt better. But this is that person who gets stuck and they're like, oh, I thought you fixed my gut issues. No, we didn't fix any of your gut issues. We gave you a Band-Aid, which was essentially putting you on this diet. And where those diets I find can be effective is, hey, let's put you on low FODMAP. Maybe let's do elemental for a short period of time. So we can then target maybe some of the core issues, whether that is like you have a lot of bacterial overgrowth, or we support the gut lining. And then from there, that's where we can focus on repopulating the gut, like slowly adding in some of these foods. So adding in some of those fibers. And that's where I find people do have a lot more success, kind of pulling them out for a period of time, eradicating maybe if there is some bacterial overgrowth, supporting the gut lining, bringing down inflammation, because also you're cleaning up the diet quite a bit there too. And then, okay, let's slowly, whether it's after 1 month or 2 months, add some more of these fibers back in. But now we really have to focus on building a robust and diverse microbiome, because we haven't really healed, or we haven't even stepped into gut health until we get to that stage there. And I think more people need to know that distinction between gut healing and gut health. And we want to get to that place of gut health. That's what's going to be more preventative in the long run.
I love how you say that, because you're exactly right. If you view it like that, we need to get to this place of gut health, and ultimately gut health is a broad microbial diversity. But in the meantime, getting there can sometimes be a bit of a struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a lot of people who've really damaged their gut microbiome from their diet, from toxic relationships, from, stress, whatever it may be.
Or toxic relationships.
Yeah. You can't help but laugh. But seriously, that plays a huge role. And that's because of the emotional stress piece of it all.
I'm no longer toxic to Ken or Rachel. Thank you.
He's going through a divorce. Passed through, in, middle.
Yeah, it's almost over.
Okay, yeah. But seriously, we laugh here, but I truly think toxic thoughts, toxic relationship, toxic food, toxic environment, all of these things are what's really wreaking havoc on our gut. So how do we begin to heal the gut? We need to remove the toxic things from our life?
Yeah. So my big thing, so if I had, we're discussing all this toxic stuff and we're discussing life and microbial, everything. The thing that would be my massively transformative goal, the thing that I want to do in life is I want to cure dementia. That would be the thing, because as we're sitting here, it would suck if you're, a certain age and you don't remember an event like this where we're, talking about toxic relationships and things like that.
How could we forget? Yeah. No one's going to forget.
But so when we're looking at this, the beauty of having a microbial diversity is we're able to track the inflammatory process in the brain, which in my opinion is probably the most important thing that we need to do is protect the brain, because as we age, we do, dementia is an epidemic. And there was a couple recent studies that came out of Harvard where they looked specifically at people with dementia, and they retrospectively looked at what was different between the people that had dementia and not. And interestingly, they found out that, the people that didn't have dementia ate berries. What are those berries? Those are proanthocyanidins. Those proanthocyanidins are the precursors to the tannin, so it's the almost to a tannin. And so the conclusion was those people that ate berries and it was dose dependent had decreased risk of dementia, a significant decreased
so
risk.
So much berries every day.
I know, and it's fantastic to eat berries, but also you can take polyphenols in different ways. And so that's one of the reasons why the blue zones tend to have less dementia as well. If you have less dementia, then you remember to go meet your friends. You remember to have coffee. You remember to do these different things. And I bring this up only because you're a huge exercise person and you're a big advocate for that. Another study just came out about 6 months ago looking at flavonoid intake, and these are all interchangeable terms for polyphenols. And these articles make it somewhat confusing because even the researchers don't particularly understand when they're using these different terms. Because they'll say flavonoid intake, and I'll read the article and be like, yeah, you're talking about a proanthocyanidin, but that's okay. Or I'll be like, oh, you're actually talking about this. Regardless, let's just say polyphenol going forward. There was the article that looked at, they were looking at elderly populations' intake of polyphenols, followed by exercise, and then they measured the cognitive ability of those that had the polyphenols, those that had polyphenols in exercise, and those that didn't. And they found that there was significant improvement in cognitive memory scores when you ate right and you exercised.
Ate right, exercised.
Yeah, the body knows what it's doing. I mean, like, you can't overthink it. Mother Nature knows what she's doing. Eat right, exercise, socialize, sleep. Don't even get me started on circadian rhythm.
Yep. Super important.
Don't you see how
sunlight?
how
like
all
our
this
gut bugs need all of the sun, just like we do, literally for mental health. I'm very dependent on the sun. I feel like my mood super influenced by it all.
Unfortunately, some of our heroes, like healthcare workers that work overnight, firemen, police, military, they actually sacrifice quite a bit doing shift work. And one of the things that they kind of disrupt is their microbiome. And I have a lot of patients, police officers, firefighters, they'll come to me, and they probably come to you as well because they're struggling with their weight. And then you find out that they're doing a different shift or they're doing whatever. And then suddenly it's hard. Then they go back and they can't quite get back to that. And it has to be something with the microbiome.
So I almost feel like that when we look and we talk about the people that happen, let's just take exactly the group that you just said, the firemen, the nurses, whoever works shift work. We can already acknowledge that they already have a disruption in their sleep. Probably the people who should be hyper vigilant around all the other things that you can do to offset what you're compromising. If you're changing in sleep habits, try not to be the one that falls into also making poor diet decisions. You really should be the one who's hyper vigilant about doing the other things, the other pillars, to make up for this deficit. And I say that because everything has somewhat of a symbiotic relationship. When we were talking about socialization earlier, not only is it allowing us to mix up our microbiomes with each other, but there's fortune and there's satisfaction from personal interaction. So it feeds amongst itself. If you were to cut one off, you don't want to make it worse for you and not continue to eat well and not continue to sleep. So for the same token, if you're wanting to power through and take one of the noble professions, do it for yourself and do it for those that you're trying to serve. Pay attention to the other things that you can control if, for instance, shift work happens to be something you're compromising.
Our own bacteria have their own circadian rhythm. And it has been shown when they looked at mouse studies and all these different things that when they disrupt that the microbial diversity decreases. And then they do the whole thing where they give them the high-fat, high-sugar diets. And the ones that are shift working, they end up putting on a whole lot more weight. And when they analyze their stool, it's because there's a dramatic shift in the stool. So getting proper sleep, getting sunlight, this whole circadian rhythm, not only just proper sleep, but telling your, whatever it is where you get out there and it tells you, oh, there's the sun. Yeah.
Third eye.
We're up. Yeah. Yeah.
So you guys, what they're really talking about is all of the different areas that help increase the diversity in your gut. And first foremost is going to be your nutrition, your lifestyle habits, getting adequate sleep, getting sunlight every single day. That is incredibly essential. But if you are someone who's starting to eat healthy and you're struggling, there may be some healing that has to be done with the gut, essentially. And that's where, you know, it is taking a little bit slow. I always give the example about like gut healing and gut health. It's like an overlap a little bit here. It's not like you just go from one to the other. But if you're noticing gut symptoms, that's usually a sign, in my opinion, there needs to be gut healing there first and foremost. But the goal is to get to this place where we can build up a very diverse microbiome, because just like you said, low diversity is connected with, dementia, Alzheimer's, mental health issues, anxiety, depression. So that's why I'm such a big believer in, taking a gut-centric approach to overall health, because we start to see everything improve when we improve the gut. But it has to be more than just, here, I'm going to pop a probiotic. It is really, that holistic picture of everything there.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to be science-based.
Yeah.
Like there was a study that, also a fascinating study where they really looked at the inflammatory cytokines of people. And it was a conjoined study. I think it was MIT and Harvard that actually did this, where it was super detailed. That was the one where I threw the slide in that you were like, oh, I was supposed to give a talk on this, and I got the flu a couple weeks ago, and Eric, with about 2 hours notice, had to go on stage and give this talk. I'm like, well, here's some slides. See what you can do with it.
It's okay.
But what they did is they wanted to see, well, if we're going to say that inflammation is a root cause of many things, the least of which is aging, inflammaging, then how do we actually look at that and have a quantitative value to it? So they looked at people, and they took two large groups of people, and they analyzed their inflammatory markers, and they coincided with the diseases that they had. And what they showed is that those people that had high levels of TNF alpha, interferon gamma, interleukin 6, all these markers that we know are like super inflammatory, they had a very poor microbial diversity. And then they looked at their microbial metabolites, and they had very few metabolites. And these people that had anti-inflammatory markers, which would be like, I don't remember exactly, but it's like IL-20, like there's ones that we hardly ever talk about because we always talk about inflammation. But there was multiple ones. Urolithin, for instance, they looked at butyrate. Butyrate was one of them. They had markedly higher amounts of anti-inflammatory stuff, and their microbial diversity was very broad. And then they looked at both groups. So they started with, what are your inflammatory markers? What does your microbiome look like? And then, oh, by the way, what kind of diseases are you dealing with? So they worked their way back to that. Yeah. They didn't say those with heart disease, where you at? And those people with inflammation, it's all the shit that you can think about. It's the metabolic obesity, the diabetes, the coronary artery disease, all the stuff, and early onset dementia. So we know that the inflammation is the key to this. How do we keep that down? Well, clearly in this particular study, it comes down to the metabolites of the microbiome. And if you have a narrow microbial diversity, you will not produce those metabolites, which is why I'm wearing a bracelet that says, what would your microbiome say? So that is...
I got mine on too,
yes,
for those who are watching.
That is to remind me that when you're doing something that maybe can disrupt your microbiome, if you're like, it won't kill me, but what would your microbiome say? So if you're sitting in line at McDonald's in a drive-thru, That's where it's at. If you happen,
what would your microbiome say?
What would your microbiome say? Yeah. If you're in a toxic relationship,
you're like, I can't do that every time. What would your microbiome
say?
Yeah. Some things that we definitely need to start thinking about. So what are some tactical things, in your opinion, that people should be doing to increase their diversity? And I know we've mentioned a few. We talked about socialization. We've talked a bit about polyphenols. What else helps with that diversity piece?
Whole foods.
Whole foods,
without doubt. And something else that it seems to be somewhat of a hot topic, and you've already referenced it. I would say that you would probably fall on the same side of thought that Ken and I do, and that is healthy animal protein. That's
so demonized right nowadays, though.
It's so funny you bring that up. So I went to FNCE, which is the dietitians conference, and it was hosted in Orlando this year. And this is the first time that they've had one since 2019, which was pre-pandemic. And this year was 1/3 of approximately of the normal attendance, and probably the same for the vendors. But something that Ken and I have talked about, and that many of the dietitians, especially the old guard that have been around a while, were disappointed with, was there was an obvious push for an acceptance of only plant-based diets. And then where certain types of people had really not much representation back in even 2019, like the high inflammatory oils such as safflower and canola, etc., they had booths. They had booths at the dietetics conference, which is somewhat infuriating, knowing that we have data that talks specifically that what we're addressing here is inflammation, and these things cause inflammation. The imitation meats are made from these exact oils and compounds.
I call those frankenfoods.
They are. Most of the fortified vitamin B foods, which are plant-based, they're sourcing that vitamin B from a different animal protein anyway. That's how they're getting a lot of the vitamin B to be fortified in all of these various foods. The fact is, it's my belief, you need healthy animal protein.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that's a point for a lot of people to hear, because they talk a lot about how plant-based diets are essential with all of the fiber for building a healthy microbiome. And my philosophy is, yes, a plant-based diet with animal protein. That's going to be the best diet at the end of the day. Plant-based with animal protein, meaning we want to eat real whole food. We want to eat as much leafy greens as possible. I say, like, be like Hermit the crab. Eat as much leafy greens as you can. Eat a ton of bright colored fruits and vegetables, berries we talked about, because they have a ton of polyphenols. Matcha green tea, a great source of polyphenols. I'm a big fan of dark chocolate. That's my favorite polyphenol to get in.
Me too.
Yeah. High quality animal protein, salmon, grass-fed beef, bison. I love wild pastures. That's actually where I get all of my animal protein sourced from. So we're not talking about going into McDonald's and going and get a hamburger and eating that type of animal protein. That is poor animal protein. That is not good for your gut. What we're talking about is high quality grass-fed and finished red meat. We're talking about pasture-raised chicken. We're talking about wild-caught fish, that have good healthy fats in them that our body needs. Cholesterol, they demonize quite a bit too, and we know that cholesterol is actually essential
Definitely
for our overall health. Like, it's the backbone to all of our hormones. So I know I'm sick and tired of people demonizing fats. I get vegans who, I gotten death threats literally for before.
You've gotten death threats?
It's literally a cult. It's a cult, and I think it's pushing a certain agenda, and that's a whole nother podcast in of itself. We can bring Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, my good friend, on, and she'll talk about muscle-centric medicine and, her philosophy about all of that. But I think, ultimately it's getting back to the roots of what we were intended to eat, essentially, hunter and gatherers, kind of like that Paleolithic type diet in a way.
We have these sharp teeth for a reason.
Yeah. I actually, so we did a whole show where Eric and I, we cooked a meal and we did the full nutritional value of it, which ended up being grass-fed, grass-finished beef, spinach, garlic. Remember we did the whole thing? Yeah. And I based that because I heard Gabrielle on Dr. Saldino's podcast, and she basically said, well, this is what I eat. I do this. I make one big thing in a week. And I did that. And I honestly loved it. I ate it every single day. The only reason why I quit doing it is because my kids were like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Something else, weirdo.
But it's filling and it's delicious.
Oh, no.
And I feel good.
Awesome. It felt good. And it's totally an appetite suppressant. You increase your leptin, because let's not even get into that whole aspect. I'm not trying to turn this into how to do this, but when we sit there and talk about like trying to maintain your weight, if you have a high amino acid profile, you have neurons in your intestines that send a signal back, and it can turn on the leptin, which is the full hormone. And it says, hey, this is a nutritious meal. We're good. You don't need to keep eating. We're going to get everything we need out of this. Now, if we look at processed foods, open up a package, tons of emulsifiers, high fructose corn syrup, and all this stuff, they actually damage the micro nerves in the intestines, and not by accident. I have a ton of patients that work for large corporations nearby that make packaged food, and they're brilliant. They're PhDs. They're food scientists. They know exactly what it's doing. These are not dumb people. I asked one, and I was just like, so why do you guys actually add that? Is that more of a stabilizer? It's like, well, we know that we don't really have such a robust leptin response when that happens.
You're going to eat more.
So what you're saying is the ghrelin goes up and you're going to eat more. And you're like, you're going to eat more chips.
And you're going to have more crap calories that you're taking in.
And so some of that is it's not even your brain. It's literally your brain's not getting the signal that says you're here. Let's talk really briefly about high fructose corn syrup.
Oh, it's terrible.
When we look at, when we were talking before and you said in your bodybuilding days that a lot of times I'll get into a whole separate hot topic that eventually we need to do a whole podcast on, which is artificial sweeteners, non-nutritive sweeteners, and its effect on the microbiome, because it's a moving target right now.
Yeah.
It
That's
appears
huge in the fitness industry. You know what? I actually did a post about artificial sweeteners and how they wreak havoc on the gut microbiome. And I don't know if you know Lane Norton, but
so BioLane, I saw, he's kind of a fan of. He was just on Huberman. He's an influencer, a smart guy. I mean, these are all. I love the fact that. Well, you're one of them. I mean, you've become this huge influencer. I love the fact that sciencey, really intelligent people walking the walk are out there doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Thomas DeLauer, the biochemist, who's just jacked and he's living the life. You've got BioLane, Dr. Lane Norton, who's doing that, and you got Andrew Huberman and these people that are. So BioLane is funny because he's kind of he did a post because there was a recent article by Ilan Ilanov out of Israel about a month ago looking at 4 different artificial sweeteners and the effect on the microbiome. And more importantly, on the effect of glucose tolerance. And basically their results were not very good. And then he came out with this whole post where he was kind of breaking down the research of how it wasn't that good. I thought it was really interesting because it was like point counterpoint.
Sure.
And his logic, and I went back through some of his videos. That's how I found him. Is that look, if you've got that sweet tooth, you're better off doing one of these, Splendas or something like that. Whatever. But we do know that certain ones are really bad. Like the ones that we know are chemicals mess up your microbiome. They F up your microbiome pretty bad. So if you've got the, aspartame and those kind of old school ones.
a lot of his theory, is that the studies have only been done in rats and with like large quantities of artificial sweeteners. So it's not actually the same with humans and the microbiome. What is your thoughts about that?
Well, the one that he was trying to defend was the first human study that came out of Ilanov's, I think his name is Dr. Ilanov. Lab. He's been on Dr. Rhonda Patrick's podcast a couple times, and he was kind of critiquing the study structure. As somebody who's done research, a lot of it, as somebody who's in the throes of it, you can always look back, hindsight's 20/20, and how you would like to do something better and everything. He was definitely defending his position, even though it was a human study that showed what the mouse studies were doing.
Yeah.
And so he was really trying to defend it. Like this study wasn't that good because of XYZ.
Yeah. And I know from personal experience because I've talked a lot about artificial sweeteners and how they wreak havoc on the gut. And I saw a lot about that, and he actually commented back on one of my posts about it. But when
you're powerful enough. You guys get into Instagram wars.
I know. But in my bodybuilding days, like my diet, I know from personal experience, you know, I don't know if I have any like canola oils or vegetable oils. I was pretty cognizant of those types of foods. But what my diet was full of was a ton of artificial sweeteners. And they were in all of my pre-workouts, my post-workouts, you know, all of the foods that I was eating. And it wreaked havoc on my gut. And I pulled them out for a while. And along with some other things, my gut got better. And then I tried to reintroduce them again after my gut got better. And I still ended up with some issues thereafter. And if you look at the side effects on like the back of a lot of these artificial sweeteners, you will see side effects: bloating, constipation, diarrhea. You'll literally see that in the side effects of it there. So that's interesting that you do speak a lot about the artificial sweeteners, because that's a lot of what my philosophy is about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to gather all this data on this, because even if you look, and when people sit there and say that there's no data, that's the one thing that everything becomes a treasure hunt, and you just pull it up and you just go, okay, what exists here? And a lot of times there's confounding data, and a lot of times people say there's no human studies. Because I looked at that and I was like, oh, wait a minute, there are some human studies. They're out of China. They're from 2012 or whatever. You can look them up, but you really have to go looking for this kind of thing. And even some of the stuff that we believe is non-caloric, not guar gum, but what's the other thing that's in
monk fruit?
Gum?
Xanthan gum. Yes, that's in everything that is supposed to be inert. You saw that study, I take it.
They actually, in SIBO studies, they would give people purposefully 5 grams of xanthan gum, right, to try to stir up the bacteria, to then treat it with Xifaxan. So the bacteria was live and flourishing, so the antibiotic would work more effectively. I read a lot of those studies when I was struggling with my gut issues, because also I was using xanthan gum, because in a lot of recipes they'll say add xanthan gum to your shakes, because what does xanthan gum do? It makes your protein shake nice and fluffy and thick, and the ice cream.
So it's a thickener.
It's a thickener. And that was also a big piece in my diet there at the time. And it's so interesting finding those studies and be like, they're literally giving people xanthan gum to try to stir up the bacteria to cause the bloating. So therefore, they can treat it better with Xifaxan, and it was more effective.
Yeah, so that was a study where the bacteria were trying to break it down. Here's what's interesting: the study I'm referencing is actually where they then showed that the bacteria that breaks it down in your microbiome, they convert. And I'm 99.9% sure it's the xanthan gum that I'm talking about. It's the thing that they use in binders that they say is net
Xanthan
calorie
gum's in
zero.
everything.
It's in everything, right?
Yeah.
Well, guess
Almond
what?
milk,
Your
salad
microbiome
dressings.
cleaves a couple things, then it becomes glucose, and the glucose gets absorbed.
Yep.
You actually end up converting that to a nutritive thing, and you think that you're not taking calories in.
Right.
And so even that, it's like we're trusting. Bottom line is, you said it before, Whole Foods. If you're opening a package, you're risking some consequence.
Well, you know, a weird thing, and you referenced earlier that one of his excuses for using an artificial sweetener was if you have a sweet tooth. But the truth is, I think that's actually probably not a positive characteristic of where you are with yourself if you're trying to improve your health. So maybe it's a quick fix, kind of like what you said, Rachel, when you said that there are gut fixes or gut healing diets, but then, of course, there's the long-term gut healthy diet. And so if someone had a sweet tooth and they needed to lean on one of these sweeteners, which I still wouldn't be in favor of, but if you did, it should only be temporarily. You really should be trying to achieve a status where you're not having sugar cravings. Having sugar cravings is not a good characteristic of a healthy overall diet. And as someone who had one when he was in his 20s, you have to overcome that. And then you do. You basically retrain your body to the healthier foods, healthier choices, and then you find, believe it or not, more happiness, and you feel better.
So I threw in really briefly the high fructose corn syrup. The one thing I want to say about this is that gets hidden in a lot of things. And there was a study that came out that looked at how high fructose corn syrup, because it has to be converted in the liver, into a usable sugar. And, that leads to fatty liver and all these other things.
Sure.
The brain can't use it, can't use the high fructose corn syrup directly. And so when you eat high caloric foods, your body is struggling to digest it, but your brain, and that was the study, that was the podcast we did on high fructose corn syrup. We got contacted by the Libertarian Party running for president and vice president, and they were having a rally, and Spike Cohen wanted to come on our podcast. So we did a mobile podcast down there, but we had to wait for him to get done. So we decided to do one on high fructose corn syrup before we did that, but we were in a bar doing it. It was really funny because it was our first mobile bar thing. But anyways, during that, what we discussed was the fact that if the brain can't use that sugar, but there's signals coming from the liver, it's like we got food, but the brain can't get it.
Yeah.
Then they realized that results in what is called a foraging response. And the foraging response turns up neural activity to seek nutritive foods, but you just ate a big ass bag of whatever, jelly beans or whatever it was. So you're sitting there, your liver's going, ugh.
There's no satiety.
There's no satiety. The brain's going, we need something. And then they realized that leads to the neural activity related to ADHD, all the way to autism spectrum disorder.
Yep.
So when you are having this situation, and then what does it lead to? It leads to this desire for more of something, and it just becomes this neural activity. Yeah, and it's just like running around. And it was fascinating to see the scientists describe it as foraging technique, which I like to fast. I know you fast. And so I'm pretty much a somewhat intermittent faster 99% of the time, discovering when the time is. But what I have found personally is that if looking back at medical school and things like that, where you show up to the morning rounds, and you have a donut, a glazed donut, and a cup of coffee, I was an effing wreck 2 hours later.
Yeah.
Wreck. If I delay eating and then I end up having Gabrielle Lyon's little recipe, I'm a machine. I'm full. I'm with it. I'm cool. And all it was just a bunch of amino acids and a bunch of polyphenols.
Yep.
There you go. A bunch of amino acids and a bunch of polyphenols, and cutting out the processed food, the artificial sweeteners, the emulsifiers. If it comes in a bag, in a box, probably don't want to eat it.
Except if the box says Atrantil.
Except if the So where can people learn more about what you guys do? Because Atrantil is a product that I've used quite a bit with my practice. It's a polyphenol blend. It was created for treating essentially methane predominant bacterial overgrowth in the gut.
Ooh, did we tell you about Northwestern yet? So I don't think anybody knows about this yet. In fact, I just came back, American College of Gastroenterology, Northwestern University, Dr. Darren Brenner, who's a world-renowned functional medicine doctor, they decided to look at Atrantil.
Yeah.
And we didn't pay for it or anything. And they came out with pretty amazing positive results, looking at a very open label study where people came in. Bottom line is, it really helped people with methane predominant constipation and abdominal pain, which is an abdominal bloating, which is fascinating because now it's starting. The exciting thing is very top tier institutions are starting to realize there's natural alternatives to help some of these people. Mm-hmm. That's what's really cool. And so we're going to be doing that. So you can go to atrantil.com, atrantil.com. More importantly, we want them getting it from you.
Yep. We'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, but we want to make sure, because you're going to give your listeners a discount with an affiliate link.
Correct.
And that's probably the best place to get it, because you can help your listeners, you can help your Instagram followers, and that is a way that you can sit there and help, and we can give people a discount. That's the key to that. And then Atrantil Pro is a physician-only line. But we are offering it on our website, my website, because I'm a physician and I want to be able to help some of my patients. The Atrantil Pro has the spore-based biotics. That's at KBMD, Ken Brown MD, health.com, where you can get Atrantil Pro. But we want people going to your affiliate page to get Atrantil.
All right. We'll put all of that in the show notes. And it's been awesome having you both on my podcast here today, getting to nerd out on all things gut health, diving into some of these studies.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if if we're dealing with any type of toxic relationship, where should they go for help on this one? Rachel?
Eric, where should they go?
Well, first go to your friends and get on their podcast and see how it makes you feel to talk about it.
Ladies, you single?
Soon enough. Soon enough.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Do
Thanks,
us a
Rachel.
favor. Share this episode in your stories. Tag Scheer Madness. Tag Dr. Kenneth Brown.
Yeah, I think
MD.
what is our Instagram? We're slowly getting in social media.
We'll put in the show
At
notes.
KBMD Health.
Yeah.
At
Hashtag
KB.
toxic relationships.
Yeah. Please put that also as you share it in your stories. This has been Scheer Madness.
Love it.